Support for the Journal of Clinical Oncology podcast is provided in part by AstraZeneca, dedicated to advancing options and providing hope for people living with cancer. More information at AstraZeneca-US.com.
Hello, and welcome to JCO Precision Oncology Article Insights. I'm your host, Miki Horiguchi, an ASCO Journal's editorial fellow. Today, I'll be providing a summary of the article titled Clinical Trial Diversity, A Bend in the Arc Toward Justice by Drs. Susan Tannenbaum and Jennifer Miller. This editorial accompanies the article Representativeness of Patients Enrolled in the Lung Cancer Master Protocol, LungMap, by Dr. Baidir and colleagues. In the previous episode of this series, our social media editor, Dr. Rafe Nakash, interviewed Dr. Mary Redman, a senior author of the LungMap article. Dr. Redman shared the background behind the LungMap development, some highlights from her paper, and her career trajectory as a biostatistician. I strongly recommend listening to the interview if you haven't done so. To begin, I'll provide a brief summary of the LungMap information before discussing the editorial. The Lung Cancer Master Protocol, or LungMap, is a biomarker-driven master protocol that evaluates multiple molecularly targeted therapies for patients with advanced non-small cell lung cancers under single trial infrastructure. Since LungMap began enrolling patients in 2014, it has addressed the challenges of implementing precision medicine at oncology clinics and assuring equitable patient access to molecularly targeted therapies. In addition to meeting an unmet need in terms of treatment, LungMap meets an unmet need in terms of accessibility to precision oncology clinical trials for all types of patients who get lung cancer in the United States. Specifically, LungMap utilizes a public-private partnership that includes the National Cancer Institute's National Clinical Trials Network, the SWOG Cancer Research Network, Friends of Cancer Research, the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, Foundation Medicine, pharmaceutical companies, and lung cancer advocacy organizations. There are thousands of sites around the country that can offer LungMap. In the LungMap article, the authors sought to examine whether LungMap improves access to precision oncology clinical trials compared to conventional standalone trials. To this end, the authors compared accrual patterns by socio-demographic characteristics between LungMap and the set of 10 clinical trials for advanced non-small cell lung cancer conducted by the SWOG Cancer Research Network. The authors found that patients enrolled in LungMap were more likely to be older, from rural or socioeconomically deprived areas, and with Medicaid or no insurance, compared with conventional clinical trials. However, female patients and patients of Asian race or Hispanic ethnicity were underrepresented. The authors emphasized in their conclusion that further research examining participation barriers for underrepresented groups in precision oncology clinical trials is warranted. In the associated editorial with the LungMap article, Drs. Tannenbaum and Miller discuss some efforts to include diverse populations in clinical trials, such as those of LungMap, and the continuing challenges we are facing. The editorial begins with a striking example of an industry-funded trial where pharmaceutical companies submitted a new drug for U.S. Food and Drug Administration approval to treat patients with non-small cell lung cancer in the United States. However, the pivotal trial was conducted wholly in China, enrolling significantly younger patients than those with that type of cancer in the United States. There were no Black or Hispanic identifying patients and far more men than women in the trial. The product was not approved by the US FDA. Although the US FDA has approved many other products where the trials were underrepresented, this example suggests that in order to capture elements in future patient populations in the United States, study samples need to include patients from underrepresented groups as well. The authors also introduced a recent study result that showed racially and ethnically underrepresented patients and their clinicians are more likely to trust and use new medical products when the trials have enrolled a diverse population. This fact suggests that clinical trials that include a higher proportion of women and older adults, as well as patients from racially and ethnically underrepresented groups, help to gain acceptance for the drug even after its approval. The authors then introduced some efforts toward enhancing clinical trial diversity, including the National Institute of Health Revitalization Act of 1993, the Institute of Medicine's 2003 report, the US FDA's 2020 guidance, and the innovative public-private collaboration of LangMap. While several studies suggested that clinical trials funded by the National Institute of Health have improved enrollment of patients from underrepresented groups, industry-funded trials have still fallen short of these goals. Since industry-funded trials play a crucial role in developing novel drugs, industry must be held accountable for clinical trial diversity and make greater efforts to improve the situation. The authors introduced additional guidance toward this end. They include the US FDA's 2022 New Draft Guidance to Industry, recommending that sponsors of clinical trials submit a race and ethnicity diversity plan. Another is the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, where the US FDA can require sponsors to have plans that include diverse populations in their clinical trials. These efforts are pivotal steps in the direction of making biomedical research more accessible and inclusive and lead to promoting health equity across the country. Thank you for listening to JCO Precision Oncology Article Insights, and please tune in for the next topic. Don't forget to give us a rating or review, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find all ASCO shows at asco.org/podcasts.
The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform. This is not a substitute for professional medical care and is not intended for use in the diagnosis or treatment of individual conditions. Guests on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Guest statements on the podcast do not express the opinions of ASCO. The mention of any product, service, organization, activity, or therapy should not be construed as an ASCO endorsement.